Yeah,
It's my
100%.
new, you're my
I
friend
like
here.
that.
So Nicole is one of my most favorite humans on the planet. She's a Feldenkrais practitioner, a somatic experiencing practitioner, and just like I just described you earlier as just like a real humble student of life. And okay, Meg, so you can come on later and we'll chat about this later if you have to go. And I just adore the way that you've been sharing this knowledge. So I've been really excited because for those of you that are clients of mine, I'm sure you've heard Nicole like a broken record. I recommend her all the time. And so I'm excited to share some of her mojo with you. She has a course starting tomorrow. So I wanted to plop this in there knowing that it's isolation time, and now if you can would be an awesome time to dive in. So I really wanted to share a little bit of her juice with all of you, and yeah.
Hell yeah.
So
Excited to be here.
yeah. So I was first of all, I was just thinking, I was having a discussion the other day with some of the Enough members,
Mm-hmm.
our Enough community, and we were talking about like soul and sustainability. And when we were sitting in that conversation, there was some discomfort going, like, fuck, we're so privileged to be able to have this conversation about sustainability right now. And within it, I have this voice that's just roaring inside of me that's like, but you know what? If we don't stay on top of these things right now, we are so vulnerable to crumbling and going so far
Mm-hmm.
back. And when I think about the nervous system after my experience, so much one-to-one experience with you and other practitioners and a little bit of knowledge that I've gained, I'm like, this is, I want to put the stand up, like, this is not privileged work.
Yeah.
Like, this is ultimately like, we need this
Yeah. For
so,
sure.
so desperately. And so this is why I feel like it's a good time to share this. So just so you know, I'm aware of the privilege, but I want you to know, for those of you that aren't familiar with nervous system health, that this is an absolute necessity. This is the anchor that anchors all of us into self and our ability to really connect with the heartbeat of our planet and the way that we can hold space for one another, not only ourselves. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because sometimes, with the privilege comes discomfort. And then I'm also like, you know what? Wait, hold up.
Yeah. Well, with
So,
privilege, ultimately, if the privilege is there, like, take advantage of that for those that don't have privilege, like, fucking step into your privilege and, like, do something about it so that you can then have impact on greater amounts of people, like, it's an interesting thing.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Own it.
totally. Well, yeah. Well, from that place, I was thinking, own it. I'm sure we'll go back and forth. So Nicole and I share lots of conversations, and I'm so excited. And so my goal, I'm like, hey, wait, hold up, Zoe. This is going to be with other people. So my goal is just to get, for those of you that are new to nervous system health in general, is to just get you really curious about it. And then also for those of you that are deeply immersed in healing, I want you to check yourself and go, okay, well, how far have I progressed? How much have I evolved? How much have I actually healed? What I'm doing, is it actually working and serving me? And so I kind of wanted to serve those two pockets of people right now in this conversation, and then us just free flow
Yeah, no, that's
from there. How's
beautiful.
that sound?
Beautiful place to start.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting
So,
because so many people in this world are recognizing that, there's more to who we are and wanting to really dive into exploring that. And there's so many amazing modalities out there. And then you might find that you're running into blocks. You might find that, you're doing all this work, but not getting to the core of it, or not necessarily reaching something that is possible, right? And to me,
mm,
that's where the nervous system comes in. Is there's so many amazing modalities out there, but if we're still living in some sort of survival pattern, then we're not going to get to our truth. Ultimately, we're not going to be able to fully show up. We're not going to be able to really thrive in what we have the potential to thrive as. So
mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, really recognizing that piece, I think, is so important. And understanding, like, what the heck does that even mean? What does it mean,
Mm-hmm.
to tap into that? What does it mean to even pay attention to our nervous system? What does it mean to work at a nervous system level? So I think it's important to recognize, like, what is your nervous system? Your nervous system ultimately is just the messenger in between your brain and your body and your body and your brain. And if your messages are caught up in some sort of survival response, then we're not living in total flow. We're instead living stuck in some sort of survival pattern, and that's the result of trauma. And it's important to recognize, isn't, these big events that happen to us. It's just us not being able to do what we needed to do at that given time to help us really move through and survive that situation. So we're still stuck in these patterns, stuck trying to survive, which then limits our access to being in that flow, being in our truth, being in our essence, being able to show up as who we are. We instead show up in those survival patterns.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those that are new, like brand spanking new to nervous system health, would you give an example of what a survival pattern might look like and how one might be like, oh, that I'm in that right now.
Totally.
You know?
I mean, there's so many examples. So
yeah,
I'll
no.
give one example that's more specific to, something happened to me and I wasn't the same. And then I'll give another example of something a bit bigger than that.
And feel free to use me, by the way, anytime. I'm an open book.
Awesome. Thank you.
So if you want to put me out as an example, go right ahead.
I'll let you jump into with any examples.
Yep.
Real life.
Yep. But just so you know.
Perfect. So we'll use an accident as an example, right? So for example, Zoe has been in a few major accidents, but one was while she was surfing. And it was while she was surfing that she got concussed and nailed in the head, big time, needed major surgery. So it wasn't just the accident of the surf situation, but it was also surgery and all the trauma all around that, right? So ever since that, Zoe hasn't been the Zoe that I knew before at all, right? And it's we've got the concussion in the mix of it, but we've also got the result of the accident and her fear of now being on a surfboard, fear of being in the water, right? And all that kind of gets triggered again, as you recently found out when you tried to go surf. That's you stuck in that survival pattern. It's like you're doing all this deep work, but there's still pieces that need to be addressed to really heal that root situation of like something is associated to surfing as dangerous still, right? Whether it's the movement of the water or it's lying on the board or if it's even holding the surfboard, something activates something that really sets you off. And it's not just in that event of you trying to surf that sets you off. It can also be just in your everyday life. There's this lingering survival tone that's going to be influencing how it is you interact with other people, interact with your work, interact with your family. That you have this lingering, not you specifically, but in general.
Oh, I do. Okay, we can be transparent about that.
Yeah. We totally end up having this lingering piece of needing to survive while trying to really show up as ourselves. And it's like, what is this piece that's not letting me fully access who I am or letting me access who I was before the accident? So that's kind of relative to a situation. And the trauma is not necessarily around the accident itself, but again, what didn't get to happen when the surfboard came at your face or when you had the surgery and you were put under in Mexico. There's so many variables and layers that can influence how your nervous system is now showing up in the world, what survival patterns might still be stuck there. So that's one example of kind of an event happened, and ever since I haven't been the same. Another example could be...
Do you want me to throw out some examples of what's shifted for me?
Sure.
So for those of you that are watching, just so you know, so in terms of, so much has shifted, and I've had a number of different traumas, and both on the physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual plane over the past 7 years. I've been woken the fuck up, basically. But so symptoms for me in my survival pattern, just to make it more concrete for those of you, again, where this is newer, is for me, I get really, really triggered when I feel my environment is really out of my control. I'm getting a lot better, though. I'm increasing my capacity for that. My heart rate, for instance, I just went surfing the other day, and I felt great about it. And this is a piece I wanted to share after. I was like, oh yeah, I've got my son and my partner there. And I'm like, Mama's going into the water. And I was feeling so good. And intellectually, I was safe. I knew I was all good. And I was so stoked. And I get in the water and I come out a different human being, to the point where my partner, Mike, he's seen this now for 7 years, 6 or 7 years. And he was like, you changed, like my eyes became disconnected. I was no longer present to the moment. I was super triggered. I was like pissed at something that he said in a matter of instant. I started feeling really flighty. I hooked up, gave Nicole a call. I was like, I need to have a session with you right now. I'm so out of body. I've got complete tunnel vision. And so that's it. That's an extreme example. A less extreme example would be feeling of anxiety, or just ultimately not being able to be present and focused, or even like mood destabilizations, moods that you're not used to. So if you've had this is more for an acute recent trauma, because when something's chronic, it's hard for us to identify what's there, because we make it we normalize it for the most part. But if you've had an acute trauma and you start to feel new mood destabilization or hormonal transitioning challenging in your menstrual cycle or anything like that, these are huge signs that there's dysregulation in the system. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just in terms of like symptoms, and how and I have plenty more I can share near the end, but how I can identify, whoa, fuck, like I am highly dysregulated, and then just knowing how much it changes.
Yeah, totally.
So I think, yeah.
The easiest way I like to describe that is like, we so easily get caught up in these symptoms that we're experiencing. We get caught up in our trauma patterns, right? It's kind of like we're getting caught up in these vortexes. Ultimately, this is the analogy I like to use. And as we get caught up in these vortexes, it's just so easy to get lost in it and try to fix it and try to do this and that and really try to like support ourselves in this vortex, when we need to kind of find the support to heal the layers of the vortex. So learning how to really start to bring our attention out into what makes us feel a little more connected and allows us to really connect with this sense of, what do I have to support me and help build my capacity to then be able to go back into these layers of this dysregulation and these symptoms I'm experiencing, to allow me to move through those pieces and then come back into my wholeness, come back into that sense of truth, and really use that support to really do this dance in between my trauma and who am I really, my trauma and who am I really. Right?
Oh my gosh, because I was going to say, I was writing a few notes before, and I was just like, I constantly feel like I'm being reborn. Like, I don't even think we should say rebirth anymore. Like, rebirth is just every day. I'm like, oh, like, I'm just like, oh, I'm like, there I am. It's like, whoa, and like, I find that there, yeah, and then there's you come out different on the other side. And I think like, yeah, there's just so much to it. And what you're saying is, again, bringing me back to the privilege piece, where I'm thinking about, like what Nicole is really good at, you guys, is Essie, the way she worked, it's a body-based therapy. So the stories, the way that we wrap our minds around ourselves, our ability to try to understand what is going on inside of ourselves, is we're not limited by our understanding. And so it's so body-based that Nicole has this ability to, and SE, and nervous system regulation, has the ability to change us on our multidimensional beings on all layers, without any story, without having to know meaning or having to have meaning and understanding. And I say that with the privilege because I'm thinking about, I know for myself, my mom, my parents, she's so supportive. I'll go straight to the mom. But they've been so let down by talk therapy that now when you think about all this like self-development and therapy, like, what are you doing? Like, that doesn't work. That's self-indulgent. That's selfish. So I'm just thinking again, the privilege piece, but how, with the work that you do, how body-based and how transformational it is, because it's actually holding space. It's releasing out of the body. And you can actually, we should probably share that, see sometimes the physical release and the experience of the unraveling of the nervous system, that which got frozen at that point in time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty amazing when we learn to listen to our body, what we start to notice and what we start to sense shifting. And the more we give ourselves that space to be curious in what's actually happening in our body, the more room there is to actually support what is and start to move through it, instead of trying to manipulate it or change it or really have this like idea of where we wanted to take it and let's do it. It's more like, how do I create some space to be curious, and what it is I'm experiencing from a body perspective. Doesn't mean the story might not have relevance or meaning making needs to happen to kind of piece something together to help us,
Mm-hmm.
move through something. But it's like, how do we start to really learn to listen to what's happening within our body from our survival responses and support what wants to happen, because it's what's stuck and what didn't get to happen that's causing our situations, right? Our symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
or how we are showing up in the world. And it's like, how do we start to really pay attention to the language of our body and use that to then see where it takes you next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's funny,
I
we're not really taught to pay attention to our body. We're not taught to even recognize, oh, interesting, I'm moving more in towards fight flee energy right now, and oh, interesting, I'm stuck there, versus, oh, I'm moving into fight flee energy and I can feel myself moving more into like really having to be take action here. But then when I realize I'm safe, I come out of that and I feel okay, and I can chill and I can engage with my friends and I can rest. Like, we don't even realize that that's happening or not happening, and it's more like, oh, I'm stuck in this energy of needing to survive, and now what? Like, we don't
mm-hmm.
even know. So the more we can listen to our body, the more we can even start to recognize just the basic principles of what's happening in our everyday life. And are we supporting ourselves to move through something? I use the wave analogy, of course. Like, am I supporting myself to move up into some sort of activation if I need to be activated? And then do I come back down, or do I get stuck in there and I'm spending more of my time in overwhelm and feeling like everything is dangerous and feeling like everything needs me to be on, and it's not even safe to not be on? Or do I feel
Mm-hmm.
totally shut down and disconnected and disengaged and wanting to just fully avoid it all, or can't even connect with anything because I'm so numbed out, right? It's even just using our body to pay attention to where are we at in all of that. And then how do we support ourselves to start to move through some of that to become more regulated and not just stuck in these patterns of being on or
Mm-hmm.
being off, right?
Totally. I feel like that for me, I feel like two daily practical things that nervous system health or awareness has really brought to my life is because I've had so much trauma, I'm in the process of healing, right? Patience.
Yep.
Um, but what I recognized and what SE, I mean, there's many gifts when I start thinking about motherhood and other things, there's tons, but two huge ones for me for being where I am now today um, are I often, oh, I gotta close the door because my family's here. Or so
Okay.
my body, I was recognizing, Jude, man, I was recognizing that my body was my like with stress, good stress, when I was excited, when I was fired up, when I was passionate, or even if I'd had like a really good orgasm, my body would just would go into that over sympathetic, and it would never come down.
Yeah.
And I was saying I would exercise, and then my body just never knew how to come down from the wave. And so both when I was excited, like either when I was stressed or whatever state I was in, because there's good amount of stress, right? Like we need that stress there, and stress can be excitement, and especially for
Exactly.
me, like you guys can probably tell, I get like so fucking excited. I'm just like leaping through the screen, so it lifts up in me. And so what I've been able to see and know now with the gift of SE and Nicole is going, okay, I'm aware that my body is still responding that way. My nervous system is still responding as though my body's in danger, even when I'm freaking stoked. And so how can I bring it down? And so for me, what I have to really commit to is a lot of restoration, you guys. Like I have to go 80 restoration, 20 on the other side. And then of course there's some middle ground there. I don't know the middle ground so well, but for me, that's been a huge practical tool because I would get so upset. I would say how frustrated I was because I'm like, fuck, everything I do that I enjoy, I would feel unwell the next day.
Yeah.
And so that has been such a gift for me to just see that. So now I'm dabbling, the better I get, and, I'm less I'm obviously way less activated and more regulated compared to 6 years ago. I can now do more and more of it. But for me, what it does is it really humbles you as a tool in your humanhood. It's like, no,
Yeah.
actually, we can't do fucking everything.
Yep.
And no.
Yeah.
And so I loved what you said about it being a messenger between the mind and body, but I also want to add, for me, it's a messenger with spirit, with source. Because
100%.
when you're not coherent, when you're not regulated, when you're not coherent in the physical form, unless you're checking out doing a yoga nidra or something like that, then you are
And who knows
gonna
what dimension you're in.
disconnect. Yeah, yeah. You are gonna feel disconnected from source unless you have an intellectual relationship, which is, classical yoga can be there. Um, but
I'll
that's what I
share, like,
love. So I just
that's
wanted to
totally
share
good.
the practical tips.
Gotcha.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll share my experience in that because that's 100% where it was. Like, I had been teaching yoga for a long time, really dove into the yoga philosophy and was like, what is this soul spirit piece? Like, I don't get it, right? Like, I get my body. I know my body so well. And it wasn't until I really started to come out of freeze and really into really sensing that I'm something other than just my physical body and other than my, personality showing up in this world, and really learning how to ultimately move through these trauma pieces and become more and more connected with this sense of self and the sense of wholeness. It wasn't until I was able to really come out of freeze and move through the pieces and really hone it in, that I was able to really grasp what the hell my soul really genuinely felt like and what it actually felt like to be connected to source. Like, that's a new experience for me because it's like,
Yep.
until we move through these stuck patterns, whether we're always on and in more of an anxious state or always off and somewhere in between, more or less it's all just freeze masked by a whole lot of other things. But the more we shift out of that, the more we have access to those deeper pieces, right? Big time. Like, it's been so cool to feel that happen and to notice that transition of like, oh, that now I viscerally feel what the hell I was studying way back then when I was into yoga and hardcore in that practice. I was like, oh, it's not just, and that same goes with a lot of things. It's not about the knowledge of it, it's about experiencing it. And for us to get there, we have to drop into our bodies. We have to really learn how to move through these survival patterns that are showing up, which we can recognize by noticing what our body's doing, right? We have to really drop in and listen and explore from there. So I'm curious what your practices are, or what you were going to share.
Oh, which ones? I feel like I was going to share so much. Maybe we'll come back to it because that's something spiked for me with that. I was just thinking for people listening, we're talking a lot about freeze response, so I think maybe we should just identify what that is, what that looks like, because it seems to be kind of the big, so I think we should share that. And then I was going to ask what I was going to ask after that, because I think it would be a good foundation for those that are new to it.
Perfect. So I'll bring it back to the basics first, and then I'll talk about how it shows up. But more or less from a survival perspective, to help us survive, we have three responses. We have fight, we have flee, and we have freeze. And freeze kicks in when we can no longer fight or flee. So if something happens to us, we do whatever we can to protect ourselves from an active state, right? We're taking action, trying to protect ourselves. All else fails, we shut down to preserve ourselves. That's us in a survival perspective. That's what happens. And then what happens is we maintain a taste of this freeze of keeping things shut down throughout our everyday life. So underneath the freeze response is that fight flee energy. Like, I didn't get to protect myself from the surfboard hitting me. I didn't get to block it. I didn't get to duck. I didn't get to really protect myself. I was totally out of control. Something happened too fast, too soon. Boom, I'm stuck trying to still survive that, but the freeze is kind of masking it. So that energy is still underneath the freeze. So we're then showing up in our everyday life in more of that kind of disconnected state with that energy underneath. Another situation could be that when we are, say, little children and we're being shamed for who we are, right? We get shamed for who we are, so then we have to mask who we are, we have to dampen who we are, we have to freeze to protect ourselves in our environment when we're little children. So then we learn how to kind of be in the world, but in this masked freezy way. It's kind of like the freeze acts as a mask for what really wanted to happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it can show up in so many different ways, but ultimately it's stopping us from showing up as ourselves. It's stopping us from speaking our truth. It's stopping us from moving through that fight flee energy in any context, because it's like, well, I don't even know how to do that. I only know how to shut down, right? Something difficult happens.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm disconnecting. See you later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting response because it helps us in the moment of the situation, but then it starts influencing how we show up in our day-to-day life. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a really simple
So
explanation,
yeah.
right?
Well, let's I think we should pass on some comment. I know, it's the avoidance of symptoms, because everything is a result of dysfunction, chronic dysfunction. Well, that's my belief, other than a few rare genetic dispositions for sure, which could be karmic. But anyways,
Yeah.
so yeah, like in terms of, people are just watching, like, oh, like how would freeze show up for me? Like I could share briefly about me. I know for me, it really showed up as forms of depression, especially premenstrual depression. Um, and then almost the way you described, Nicole, that my surf accident, when you said, and you just went like this, and I realized in that moment, I'm like, I was living my life like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way you moved your body, it just brought me a flashback to going, okay, I was frozen in the moment of trying to pull away from the surfboard, and then everything that happened then. So I really was kind of in hyper vigilant,
Yeah.
like nonstop hyper vigilant, but my hypervigilance happened inside of me. I didn't have the agency to actually take action because I
Exactly.
was so frozen. So therefore, I lost control of my boundaries in
Yeah.
my relationships with my family and my partner. I lost my sense of self-worth and how to share that with people. I had major amounts of premenstrual depression. So it showed up for me in a lot of ways. I don't know if you could share some other ways that
I
people
think
might be able to identify.
even like focusing on work,
Mm-hmm.
focusing on being present in a conversation, um,
Mm-hmm.
needing to isolate and stay away from engaging with people. It could even be the opposite, being really engaged with people, but you're not really there with them. It's just this coping mechanism of just like, yeah, I need to just be out there and I'm going to be this extrovert, but ultimately it's
Mm-hmm.
more just you trying to mask not feeling what's underneath, right?
I was both. I was both of those things.
Right? Totally.
That's what I'm telling you guys. I'm like reborn over and over again.
Exactly. Never
Yeah.
ending.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Oh
think
my
that sense of
gosh.
like just being numb to self, numb to what's going on is a big one. Not being able to focus or be motivated or really tap into being able to do.
Mm-hmm. And what about some physical symptoms, like maybe some gut issues? Like what are things you commonly see with regards to freeze response?
Yeah, there's a number, but gut issues can definitely, it's interesting. Different people experience every differently,
Of course.
right? So
Yeah.
for some
Mm-hmm.
people, the result of trauma in general can be gut issues because the system is too busy surviving, trying to focus on survival, that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the energy to focus on what it's supposed to be doing. It's stuck in on instead of being able to turn off and put awareness into digestion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
digestion can be issues,
And sexuality.
sexuality, shutting down totally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inability to express emotion. That's another great example, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel anything. What do you mean? I know that one
Mm-hmm.
well. What do you mean? I don't.
Mm-hmm. I have for periods of time too, which is very rare for me. That was not me at all.
Yeah, right. So disease,
Yeah.
illness can show up. Same thing because everything's shut down, but every underneath that is this fight flee energy. So our body's just like trying to survive, trying to survive, trying to survive. Freezes on top of that, just like let's see
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about, and then underneath it's just like and we might experience
Mm-hmm.
both. We might experience that sense of being in that shutdown state, but we might also experience what's underneath it, which is that anxiety feeling, this go 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 feeling. Freeze is kind of helping contain it, but there's so much of it. It's just like, what is
I
this
like
I'm
that.
constantly feeling, right?
I like that visual for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
keep getting sick because
Mm-hmm.
my body's too busy trying to be in survival mode and not fighting off viruses or any sort of
Mm-hmm.
illness, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that can happen as a result of the freeze and the result of the stuck sympathetic energy, that fight flee energy.
Mm-hmm. There's nothing that can't really happen when you talk about it physiologically, which
Yeah.
is kind of what I wanted to get at. And that's for me, like for those of you, I've been really passionate about supporting holistic wellness for about 17, 18 years now. And so the way I like to think about it, I was saying to my sister, I was trying to explain SE to her. It's like when I get clients or myself, because I've had enough of my own issues, I'll keep it with myself right now. I was like, if only I could go through an x-ray machine and that x-ray machine could tell me the root source of all the dis-ease and discomfort and, my shadows, and just tell me, where is it coming from? Because I'm ready. Like, I am ready to take this on.
Yeah.
And
would you
for
say it's
me,
coming from nervous system dysregulation?
So this is where I'm going with it.
Okay.
So when and I just posted a video today, when I before engaging with you around nervous system together and having these conversations, when I was really unwell, I my body was going fucking nuts. My intellect was like, I'm safe, I'm all good, but my body was going nuts. And it got to a point where I just kept on saying to Mike and everyone, I'm like, I know I'm okay, but my body is going crazy. Like, for instance, I went on a paddleboard one day and I thought a tsunami bigger than like twice as big as my house was coming towards me. And it was like the tiniest wave. And so the way I knew that it wasn't, but my body was responding like it was, to the point where it actually flipped visually and made that wave bigger, even though I knew it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I kept on saying, it's my nervous system. This is beyond my control. My nervous system is responding. I didn't know anything about nervous system regulation, somatic experiencing. And so I got introduced to it at that point in time. And since then, I basically was like, I humbled, got down on my knees, and I was like, I know fucking nothing. I went to school for anatomy, physiology, kinesiology. I studied this for 7, 8 years, been teaching yoga for how long? I know nothing. And I was so disappointed. I crumbled, going, it's all, the anchor is nervous system. And there's a few other pieces. I call them like my pillars in the resourceful woman. But when we talk about anchoring ourselves into wellness in the human form, it does start with the nervous system.
100%.
And there's other ways, there's gateways to impact the nervous system. But if that's the focus, that's where healing happens. And I'm saying that because, that x-ray machine, if we could just get put through it and people could see where it's coming from, it would be, I bet you 99% of it is nervous system. And even if it's karmic coming from another generation, that's nervous system dysregulation. That's imprinting and drawing the picture and coding your DNA and showing up in you. And so this is why it's not a privilege.
Yeah.
This is why we have to take it out of a luxury, if we can. Be like, no, this is our work. This is what we need to do.
100%. Oh yeah.
So so I wanted to say,
hurry up and do your SE trainings. We need more of them.
Oh, and I tried to when Nicole was doing it, but I haven't been well enough. So hopefully this year I'm going to do it. But but it's been really nice to enjoy it from this end of being being so deeply impacted by it, because I feel like I've learned so much, but I obviously haven't wanted to share it because I haven't wanted to project my experience that much, but it's wonderful. Anyways, we won't go into that. But I wanted to share what I was thinking about, what I wanted to bridge now after the talking about freeze, and how it's nervous system health as a bridge for the mind and the body. And then I was like, let's get source in there too, because that's been my experience. Yeah. And so I just was thinking, I found it so funny because your course, Nicole has an online course, which is also done virtually with groups and one-to-one, which I've been immersed in for the past 5 and a bit months. Where was I going with that? Help me out, Nicole.
Where was I going with that?
Nervous system dysregulation.
Yeah.
Oh, crikeys. Oh, right. Because I'm thinking about source. I'm thinking about source. That's why it's like I'm trying to connect to something that's not as tangible. And so Nicole's course is called Expand. And when I look back at my old, your 6 months one. Yeah, and then I was going to talk about the other one. But when I look back on my old bios, I called myself the midwife of expansion. And so I wanted to talk about expand, and I wanted to talk about why you came up with that name, and just so we can take it further, because that feeling of expansion, which we were talked a little bit about, is, for me, I've never felt so whole once I found that level of regulation and coherence and connection to source.
Exactly.
And to me, it's just,
Yeah.
that was. And so I'd love for you to share why you titled it Expand, and then we'll get into the discover after. But
Yeah.
I'm just curious about your take on that, because it's such a beautiful, like, oh,
You feel it,
yeah,
right? I think that
yeah,
that was one of the, I mean, I'm such a body person. Like, for me, everything is so felt. So coming up with that name of Expand was just like, duh, that is the experience. Because when we're in a trauma response, it's more of a contracted experience. There's more ugh to it, right? There's more like survive to it. Versus the more we move out of that, the more we start to really tap into feeling not only the expansion of ourselves and how we're really really okay with taking up space and filling that space and connecting with the space around that space, right? The more we move out of the contraction and out of the trauma, the more access we start to have in this expansion. And as you shared, that expansion then ultimately is infinite, right? The more we really dive into the layers and dive into healing the trauma and connecting more and more into this expansion, the more there's access to, I use the obviously a wave analogy because that's how I love to roll, but we move out of just being the identity of self in this more contracted piece into connecting with, the current underneath the wave that is more of us all connected. And then underneath the current lies that vastness of deep, deep ocean that is infinite. And that is, that sense of really moving out of identity and into this, I am more than that. And I am connected to something bigger and greater and vaster and more expansive. And it was my own experience of that really brought in this sense and awareness of like, whoa, that's what we're working towards, is that connection with that expansion, to that vastness, to that, call it source, call it whatever the hell you want to call it, but this sense of like, I don't need to be this tiny little identity stuck in my chaos. I can be more than that. I can be more than my contracted self that's trying to hide or trying to, show up how I'm supposed to show up. I can start really expanding into myself, and then as we do move through more layers into more than self. So
I
to me,
love
it's
that.
like, it's just such a feeling. So the name came from that. It's like, yes, take me there. Let's all move a little more towards
Totally.
expansion.
Totally. And what I love about it is that once you get into that place and you find yourself in that home, even in the chaos, even when your system gets hijacked again, because if you're on, I mean, use the wave again, right?
Yeah,
If you're healing, which I am, I now can anchor into the knowing that that is always there.
exactly.
And so
And
that is
that's,
my motivator,
yeah,
right? That is like, it's almost like when people try to start meditating for the first time. It takes so long, and eventually it becomes a non-negotiable. And I mean, we'll talk about meditation another time, whether it's body centered or not, but I'm just saying it becomes, once you access that place of complete mental calmness and you're really rooted into the infinite connection to yourself and all that you are, universal intelligence, however you want to play it, that is what motivates you to keep coming back. And that is the most healing place when you can sync up to those radio frequencies and get there. You know that it exists, and you know that it's always there living inside of you no matter where you are. So for me, that's what I love about this work, because it helps me go, okay, I'm a human, because I'm very vata, very airy, quite easily. And so I can connect. My multidimensionalness does better with source than it does here since the traumas. And so what the nervous system does is it roots me into reality, into being me, and then being a partner and being a mom.
yeah,
And then it gives me the space within me, the humanness, when there's discomfort, to go, okay, there's always that there. And it's growing. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's, to me, what wholeness, like I used to say wholeness all the time, but I'm like, that's what wholeness is. And I loved what you said, because I work a lot with women, and I'm super passionate about self-reclamation, as I always have been. And it's so interesting because I'm constantly reclaiming and finding more of who I am, and I'm really passionate about expression. And when you said part of the trauma in childhood is putting on those masks.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that trauma for women is actually taking up space. And the wonderful thing is that when you get so regulated, you take up space, and you're not taking, you're taking up space, but you're actually not taking up space at all.
Yeah.
You are gifting space.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually, there's no ego, there's
Yeah.
nothing. It is just this place of like centered an existence that is like just filled with love.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love how you said the mask piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then just for women, like, because yeah, we have a fear to take up space. And I shouldn't just say women. I work mostly with women. That's my comfort zone, and that's who I work best with. But yeah, it's so big.
It's
It's
so
so
big, and
huge.
it's important to recognize that we all have it. We all are already
Mm,
connected. We are all already whole, right?
hmm
And this is a really important piece because we so often get caught up in what's wrong and how do I fix it, and let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. But it's like, no, you're
hmm
already whole. And then, yeah, you have some survival patterns that you fall into. And how do we start to support you to move through these survival pieces in whatever modality you want to practice? But it's like, recognize you're already whole and then come from this place and then start
hmm
to explore how to support yourself in your pieces that are ultimately little fragmentations of you instead of connected into the whole piece of
Mm,
you, right?
totally. So maybe we could share, or you could share a little bit about some of those pieces. So for those of you, Nicole has a course coming up tomorrow, starts tomorrow, right?
Yep.
Called Discover, which I'd love to talk about. Discover piece, which I think is another wonderful title for what you do. Um, yeah, let's share some of those pieces if you don't mind.
Yeah. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
I I have an analogy I use that maybe that is helpful. It's like the wholeness is like a river. When I'm in the river, I'm whole. When I'm in the river, I'm in flow. I'm regulated. I'm moving through life at, my capacity. And then on the sides of all the river is on the side of the river are these vortexes, and these vortexes are us stuck in our survival responses, right? So along our river we have all these little survival responses, and that survival response or survival pattern could look like, oh, so many different things. It could look like that freeze response. It could look like um, me just being on all the time. It could look like constant anxiousness.
Insomnia.
It could look like insomnia. It could look like digestion issues. It could look like so many things. Regardless, we're just like caught up in these trauma patterns, these survival patterns. And it's like, yeah, but these survival patterns are still connected to the river. So, how do we start to learn to do these dances in between the survival pattern and dip ourselves into this part that already knows it's whole? And that's a lot of what Discover and Expand is about, is giving you the tools to not only access this piece of wholeness in this river, and here it is where we can build capacity and really tap into the sense of ourselves, to then dip back into our trauma patterns and approach them in a slightly different way, to start to move through those pieces layer by layer, using that river to kind of support us to do this dance in between these two pieces. And bit by bit, as we're kind of moving through these trauma patterns and moving through these vortexes, we then begin to get stronger riverbanks. Those vortexes start to disappear, and more of us ends up in the river, and we're feeling more in flow, more regulated, more connected, right? So it's like the Discover and Expand, both programs are really about giving you the tools to first identify what it means to be in these survival patterns, what it means to be in that river, and then what tools can you use to really help you tap into finding a bit more capacity, finding a bit more sense of strength, finding a bit more sense of self, to then dip back into the trauma patterns to really start to learn how to move through what didn't get to be moved through before. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
causing the vortex over here.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's my hope, is to really give people more of an understanding of what it means to listen to their body, what it means to be in these survival responses, what it looks like, And then how do you support yourself to move out of these survival responses and get more connected to yourself?
Right. And I love that. For me, that's like a huge value of mine in sharing is like, how do you support yourself? And that's what's so wonderful with nervous system healing is that, yes, the healers and the teachers and the people can be there to support you, but there doesn't have to be a codependence
Yes.
there. You're not reliant on them for your healing. Once you become so aware of your body, you eventually become your own you are your own medicine. Like I truly believe you, and you just, but it is helpful to have someone that's aware of it because, oftentimes we resist, it is common for us to resist what we need the most.
Yep.
Or for us to be fearful or there's layers. So we don't always know ourselves that well until we start to learn our body, the language of our bodies. And once we can listen to our bodies, the bodies don't lie. And we have to learn not only to listen to them, we have to learn how to like actually take action and fully respond with them.
Totally.
Right.
And the thing is, they do sometimes lie, but they're lying to protect us in the survival response.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Like, shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my body's like this. Oh, right.
Yes.
I know. Pattern trying to survive here instead of being really listening to my intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask that because that just came up. There was in my Resourceful Woman bundle I just sent out. I was like, now I obviously want to tell you women I want to tell you to listen to your bodies, and there's these pieces. So because I know for myself, there's a lot of people that are wellness leaders as well. And I'm sure with you as well, people that are on here. How do you hold that space where it's not disempowering, but you're also informing? Right? It's such a fine line. I notice this in the birth world all the time. Informing versus not disempowering and not putting fear, but no, but actually wait, So how would you put that?
I think the language, I do a lot of invitational language. To me, it's the invitation. I think that's really important. And that's ultimately all I can do is invite some curiosity and awareness around something. And then it clicks and there's curiosity or there isn't, to me, it's very much around that.
Yeah, I love that. And then that supports, which we talked about last time or a few conversations ago, just providing the safe space.
Yes.
So people aren't met with any sort of resistance or friction towards something. It's like, it's an invitation. I can either go in or I don't have to. And then they're self-empowered in that. Yeah. So I love that.
And regardless what you choose, I'm here with you.
Right? I love that. Oh, Virginia. Sorry, I got distracted. So I know there's only a few of you guys on there, but is there anyone that has any questions for Nicole or anything before we start wrapping up in the next 5 minutes? You can either send them off now, or of course you can send DM Nicole or I a private message. And for those of you that just joined on, Nicole is starting a course, which obviously I highly recommend. This is the first time I've ever done an Instagram live with a friend, and I just so deeply believe in the work that she does and in her. And so I highly, highly recommend it or passing it on. If you know anyone that's just hasn't been the same since a trauma, big or small, emotional, physical, mental, anything, just look into it. I invite you. I wanted to.
Do you have any? A little, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Hi, Lyndon.
Yes. Hi, Lynn. Hello.
Do you know Lyndon too?
Yes, from the Up and Down workshop.
Oh, of course. Duh.
Yes. Hi, it's so good to see you. We'll see you. Your heart. So good to see your hearts.
Yes. Okay. So the program itself is starting tomorrow, and then for 4 weeks I'm releasing a bunch of content. So each week there'll be a new dose of content to explore. A lot of it'll be educational based as well as self-explorational. So there's the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what it means to work with the nervous system, understanding trauma, understanding regulation and dysregulation, all these educational pieces, but then there'll be all kinds of explorational pieces where you can dive into really understanding what is happening for you and doing some reflecting on what shows up. And there's also a community group where you can ask questions and share your experiences. We'll also, as a community, be getting together once a week to have just check-ins and just share a little bit about what's going on and what's showing up and what's working, how is this stuff kind of supporting what's going on. And then I'll also do weekly Q&As. So that's the first 4 weeks. So a lot of content, a lot of support with the community and Q&As. And then following those 4 weeks
Kyla.
will
Yeah.
be, oh, nice. Nailed it twice with me today.
Yeah.
So good. Love it. And then following the 4 weeks, the community will stay active and will continue to do monthly Q&As and monthly check-ins. So my intention is to really create a sense of community around this work and to really recognize that, you know, together we're in this in our very unique journeys, but to really create this sense of community and continue with the work. So although the content will be released in 4 weeks, ultimately you have that access to that content forever. There isn't this rush to get through the content. It's more just starting to get your feet wet, explore, dabble, depending on your capacity. It might be that you take a lot longer to get through the content. It doesn't matter because we're in this held space where we can really dive in at whatever pace works for each individual, but also really sensing the container and the support from everyone else in the community.
Sounds so good.
Yeah.
So good. And so what would you say then in terms of the people that you feel like it would benefit from? Because there's so many different levels of trauma. And I know when you're in trauma, sometimes you feel so separated and so unique that it's hard to often dive into that community. So maybe speak to that a bit.
Ultimately the program will support everyone that's interested in this work. And then depending on your trauma, you may need to do some support, get some support more one-on-one, where it's like specific to what's going on to you. It's like the program's more about creating a sense of a foundation of understanding the work, giving yourself tools on how to support yourself. And then depending on where you're at, you might need some extra support, some hands on some kidney adrenals or your brain stem, and really honing into what specific traumas you need to move through. So ultimately, I do feel that the information can be super supportive for anyone who's intrigued about nervous system healing. And then just recognizing it's not therapy, it's more just this educational platform that provides tools and insight on really how to support yourself at that level. And then if you want extra support, depending on your situation, there's not enough SEP, somatic experiencing practitioners, but some great ones out there that
not
you
yet
can connect with.
Yes, there's a question that just came in, Nicole. I know we're rolling. We've got about 4 minutes here. But someone just asked about the difference between, the question's gone now, so feel free to type it.
You can scroll up.
Okay.
Scroll up. What's the difference between working through triggers in psychotherapy and somatic therapy? So I don't know, I can't speak from a psychotherapy perspective because I don't do psychotherapy. But from a somatic perspective, it's very much about what's not happening in the body. I use the wave analogy a lot. It's kind of like, okay, I'm noticing myself stuck in some sort of trigger. So something triggers me. I get moved up into some sort of activated state. And what I want to happen is to organically move through that so that I'm no longer triggered by what that trigger once was. And it's a somatic sense. It's like, oh, that just triggered me. I feel it. I feel my body responding in this way. I want to be able to move through that response in whatever way needs to organically unfold to then move through. And then the nervous system no longer associates that trigger as something that will send you into whatever that response is. Versus other modalities, I think, are focused more on how can you find ways to move through versus how do you organically move through from a somatic perspective. That's would be my quick answer on that. You can always DM me if you have more questions on that, because it's a
hard one to answer in short amount of time, I think, too.
But I think organically wanting to ride through whatever response didn't get to happen that you're kind of getting stuck at, hence why you keep getting triggered.
Yeah, and I think something that I personally experientially would love to clarify is just that it's not therapy, but it's very therapeutic, right? Yeah. So there's we can't classify it, or limit in that, but it is beyond therapeutic in terms of the actual release and the experience of actual long-lasting change. Like once you process it, it's gone. It's out. It's released.
No longer.
Right.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
No.
What?
That used to. That used to. I know. What the hell? Now
that's what I'm saying.
I didn't even freak out. What?
So I'm saying I'm just like waking up every day or every few minutes. I'm like a different person.
Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
but we should go. We got to roll. This is the first time I've done a joint live,
So
so
great.
I
So
feel
stoked to do this with you, Zoe. We'll have to do it
I
more
know
often.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. I have so many questions. I wrote down stuff being like, just in case, but I'm like, no, there's so many things. I'm like having a hard time not just asking. But if any of you guys have any questions for Nicole, send her a DM.
Yeah.
It is starting tomorrow, and I do not sell people at all. If you look at my accounts, I am not a seller, a sharer. I 100% believe that everyone on the planet really, really could use this. And I know Nicole is offering with the times, her pricing is reflecting what's going on right now. And she has a whole lot of love and just like a total expert in this. So I vouch for you 100%. And I love you so
I
much,
love
babe.
you too.
And I
Thank you
love
so
the work
much.
that you do and for me. And yeah, sending
So
you all so
grateful.
much love.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Happy
much love.
Sunday.
Yeah, happy
Yeah.
Sunday, and thank you for everyone for
Hey.
showing up. Reach out
Yeah.
anytime. I geek out like
Yeah.
crazy. I love geeking out on this stuff. So
I mean, we could do it. Well, yeah, we'll start doing these more regular,
yeah,
I think. We'll put up a schedule.
yeah.
So we can hang out.
You
It'll
keep
be an
looking at
excuse for me
I
to get
know,
away
it's
from family.
just a way for us to hang out.
Yeah. Okay, I gotta click because the hour's almost up.
Okay.
But bye, guys.
Love you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
love you
everyone.
too. Sending everyone so much love.